on this call. If you have questions, we're going to ask you to submit them through your screen, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the webinar. So again, welcome to this webinar. Just to give you an overview of who our team is, it's myself, Dave Thomas, the Vice President of Community Partnerships. Starting on June 12th, we'll have a new Director of COC Programs. Her name is Karen Cowell. Renee Crolius, the COC Program Manager, who's one of the co-presenters, and then Elizabeth Perez, who's a COC Program Manager as well. Again, some other housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and will be available along with the slides on the Continuum of Care website there on your screen, allchicago.org/COC. Questions also after this webinar can be directed to cocprograms@allchicago.org, and we're happy to respond. Today, what we hope to have you all learn by the end of the webinar is the details around the LOI for new project opportunities through the FY17 HUD COC Competition notification of funding availability. We'll also talk about how to successfully submit the LOI through our online platform, SurveyGizmo. And we'll talk about the LOI selection process and the steps after the LOI process. Just some common terms and some context throughout this webinar. When we talk about HUD, that means the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. When we talk or reference the HARTH Act, that's the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing Act, which outlines how the programs should work that we'll talk about later, that's available for funding later. COC references Continuum of Care, which is a membership organization and also the HUD program for these programs that are being funded. And then the COC board here in Chicago, it's our Continuum of Care governing body. So first of all, the FY17 HUD COC Competition, or Notice of Funding Availability, the NOFA, is the process for which continuums can apply for renewal programming and new programming each year. It begins the COC program competition annually. It outlines the opportunities for renewal funding, so projects that are already in existence that want to be refunded, as well as new project opportunities. And new projects are created through one of two processes, through bonus project funding that's stated in the NOFA, or through reallocation through the local process to capture dollars that are already in existence, but to reallocate them to different programming. For additional context, the programs are based on both the Opening Doors Federal Strategic Plan to prevent and end homelessness, and specifically with looking at the goals of ending chronic homelessness by 2017 and ending homelessness for families and youth by 2020. What also is used for these new projects, we'll be looking at the Plan 2.0, Chicago's Plan to End Homelessness, where two of the main goals are to increase permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing units in our system, and to have a fully functioning coordinated entry system, which is a requirement by HUD for all COCs. So on Wednesday, the new project letter of interest was released, or request for letter of interest. The way to submit it is through the online platform SurveyGizmo. LOIs must be received no later than Wednesday, June 7th at 5 p.m. and late or incomplete submissions will not be accepted. And again, the purpose of the LOI is to determine projects that meet minimum criteria before being selected to submit a full new project application. And we'll discuss this more about next steps after the LOI process later on in the webinar. just to kind of talk about where the funding for these potential new projects are coming from, one source is what we call voluntary reallocation dollars. This year, organizations in our COC who have already been receiving renewal funding agreed to, in a sense, give back some unspent funds from their renewal grants. We asked them in a process a few months ago if they would be willing to give back to the COC money that in the last 3 years they had on average been giving back to HUD. So through that pool of money coming back to the local COC here, new programs can be created rather than going back to HUD. This year, in this process, the total amount from voluntary reallocation was $540,222. Another way that there be funding for new projects this year is through anticipated bonus project funding through the NOFA. The bonus project funding amount will be determined in the FY17 NOFA, which as of today still has not been released. Once the NOFA is released, the bonus project funding level will be announced. And as an example, last year the bonus project funding was a little over $3.1 million for our continuum. And it created roughly about 5 or 6 new projects. So just to recap, the funding for new projects this year will come through voluntary reallocation and bonus project funding to fund all new projects in our system. So let's talk about what kinds of models of programming are going to be allowable for funding. So this is based currently on the COC registration, which came out a few months ago. The NOFA might change, but this is what we know as of today. So new projects can be for permanent supportive housing, or PSH, serving 100% chronically homeless individuals and families, including youth. It will also fund permanent housing, rapid rehousing, serving homeless individuals and families, including youth, and they do not have to necessarily be chronically homeless. This year, HUD is announcing a new project model type that has not been funded in years past, something called Joint Transitional Housing and Permanent Housing Rapid Rehousing. This also serves homeless individuals and families, including youth, and is, as far as we know, is not specific to chronically homeless households. 2 other types of grants they'll fund are coordinated entry supportive services only projects that contribute to Chicago's coordinated entry system, and homeless management information system projects, or HMIS grants, that only All Chicago may apply for. Because All Chicago has a memorandum of understanding with the Chicago COC, in that MOU it states that All Chicago is the only entity that can apply for HMIS grants. So this will not be a project model type that can be applied for in the LOI process. So for the new projects this year, an organization may apply for an amount up to $540,000. And depending on the NOFA and the bonus project funding that we anticipate, organizations may be asked to either scale up or scale down depending on the available funds. All the programs must align with Chicago's programs model chart, and there's a link in the webinar, and when we post these later, you can click on the link to find the appropriate program models in that chart. And all programs must be in compliance with HUD COC funding requirements and HEARTH Act regulations. And again, there's a link to click on to find exactly what those regulations and stipulations are for your knowledge. So to talk about a couple of the programs, just to give you some quick basic requirements, the programs need to be ready to start at some point in calendar 2018. That will be dependent on when HUD, if you're accepted, HUD will issue a contract, but it should start at some point in the year 2018. All new projects will be required to participate in Chicago's established coordinated entry system, and there's a link. CSH is the main entity for coordinated entry, or the lead entity for coordinated entry, and they have their own website for coordinated entry that you may want to look on just to ensure that the program can match that requirement. Using the Housing First model is also a requirement of our continuum, and all new projects will be expected to follow that model. All new projects will use HMIS as the database to capture client information on individuals and families who need your services. And again, all new projects must align with Chicago's Programs Model Chart and Chicago's Plan 2.0. We want to point out a mistake that was made in the actual document for the LOI, for the request for LOIs. On page 4, in the chart for rapid rehousing on the right-hand side, the first bullet point states, rental assistance must be administered by a state, unit of general local government, or a public housing authority. That's an error. That does not need to happen. Agencies can administer their own rental assistance dollars. They do not need to go through a government agency of any kind. We apologize for that mistake, and the LOI will be updated. So the next project model type that may be funded are coordinated entry SSO grants. And similar to the other programs, they need to be ready to start in 2018 at some point. They need to align with the established coordinated entry system process. They will also need to utilize the Housing First model as well, and to use HMIS to collect client-level data. It also aligns with the Chicago Programs Model Chart and Chicago's Plan 2.0, and specifically in the Programs Model Chart, the 3 models that can be funded for coordinated entry are housing systems navigation, outreach coordination, and system facilitation. So you'll see those listed in the Programs Model Chart.
This year, as Dave mentioned, we were notified that they're going to be releasing a joint TH-PH rapid rehousing model. The information in the slides is what we know of based on the registration that was released. This will be a combined transitional housing and permanent housing rapid rehousing model into a single project, where the target population could be individuals, families, including youth experiencing homelessness. The registration outlined that this could be utilized as a low barrier temporary housing situation while the individuals and households move quickly into permanent housing. So similar to transitional housing as of right now, there is a 2-year total. And if we move on to the next slide, it outlines a little bit more that there's this opportunity to create a more crisis temporary housing situation where the exit to permanent housing is a goal where it is a quick goal and can use rapid rehousing dollars. What we know is that this is to really meet the needs of it being a choice-driven program model where the clients can choose how long they want to be temporarily housed before they are rapidly rehoused. And this could be a creative solution for different supports depending on a population, such as domestic violence, youth, or single adults. The only other information we have at this time until the NOFA is released is the eligible costs that were also outlined in the registration, which includes capital costs, leasing and operating costs to provide transitional housing, the short or medium-term tenant-based rental assistance to pay for the rapid rehousing portion of the project, supportive services, HMIS, and project administrative costs. We are looking forward to learning more about this model and we'll release that information as soon as the NOFA is released.
So now we're going to talk about some other minimum requirements that all the new projects should adhere to. You'll apply as all new projects should be within an organization that's a 501c3 organization. for an amount up to $540,000 for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, joint transitional housing, permanent housing, rapid rehousing, or coordinated entry SSO grants, as we've discussed. It would be a one-year contract that could be renewable from year to year based on our evaluation process and where projects are ranked. Please note that HUD has not yet verified the funding amounts or allowable project model types at the time of this request for LOI announcement, but this is the most information we know from the registration. So again, things could change, but this is basically what we know at this point. Project budgets may be required to be adjusted after HUD releases the NOFA, but we would work with organizations around that who are selected. We stated earlier that the utilization of the Housing First model was necessary. The Housing First model is a homeless assistance approach that prioritizes providing people experiencing homelessness with permanent housing as quickly as possible and subsequently providing voluntary support services as needed. It is housing-based with an immediate and primary focus on helping individuals and families quickly access and sustain their permanent housing. Provide support services that are voluntary, flexible, and consumer-driven using the harm reduction principles. Other minimum requirements for the new projects are specifically for PSH projects to allocate 80% of the total HUD amount share to housing, and no more than 20% of HUD dollars can be allocated to supportive services. So for example, if you apply for a $100,000 grant, no more than $80,000 would be used for housing and no more than $20,000 for support services. Coordinated entry SSOs are exempt from this requirement due to the nature of the type of grant it is. It's all supportive services. Projects must also be able to provide at least a 25% match of the total grant amount minus leasing dollars for PSH projects. This is a HUD requirement. Also, we've stated before, all projects should be ready to proceed in calendar year 2018. New projects that propose to use existing units must begin to house homeless clients during the calendar year as well. The use of Chicago's HMIS to capture client information on individuals and families who need homeless services is also a requirement of our COC. This means agencies must participate quarterly in HMIS data quality assessments. And again, we can't stress enough that all new projects must participate in Chicago's coordinated entry system, as this is a mandate from HUD and our COC. If selected, organizations must be ready to provide the most recent audit that has occurred within 9 months of the end of the fiscal year. That will be a requirement if you get past the LOI stage for new project applications. Again, projects must be in alignment with the Chicago Program Models Chart and Chicago's Plan 2.0 to End Homelessness. Projects will need to follow requirements set forth in the NOFA upon its release as well. Projects must operate and be located within the City of Chicago city limits, and we have a link. And projects should be able to meet HUD criteria as outlined in the 2017 NOFA, which again has not been released as of today. But please note that any criteria listed in the LOI or the application is subject to change depending on information we receive in the NOFA when it's released. We'll do our best to notify organizations of the changes if there's any major changes. For the LOI, the minimum requirements, as you may have seen if you've read the PDF of the LOI, that we're asking agencies to submit a summary of no more than 1,200 words that demonstrate that the organization has an interest and experience in providing housing or services to the target population you plan to serve. And we ask that you provide as much detail as possible about the project. There's also a certification checklist that will be verified if the project is selected to submit in the next stage a new project application, and we'll talk about future steps later on in the webinar.
Great. So hopefully you have also seen the SurveyGizmo link. If not, we have the online submission link on here as well, and there should be some handouts in the pane in the webinar. So as we mentioned, the only way that we will be accepting LOIs are through the online submission, which is through SurveyGizmo. And the LOI through SurveyGizmo includes 3 sections which need to be fully completed, which include the introduction and selection criteria, the letter of interest, and the certification checklist. In addition, the way that the SurveyGizmo submission ends is with a signature that is, of course, typed in, but so make sure that the right person is submitting the LOI on behalf of your agency. You will be able to save and continue later by entering your email at the top of the page as you go through SurveyGizmo. However, we always encourage you to look at the PDF version. It matches the SurveyGizmo link. So we would encourage that you do have it fully completed when you go into SurveyGizmo, so you don't have to keep logging in back and forth, and you do it one time through. But there is that save and continue option. Also, it's really important that you note that there is a view the PDF of the application prior to completing online, so before you submit. And we would encourage you to do that with your PDF. And save it for your internal resources. And then in addition to that, our PDF version of the LOI is posted on our website as well. So you might be familiar with this warning sign. So before you submit, make sure you click download, ensure all the information is complete and accurate. So please review. Make sure that one of the most important things is that the primary point of contact's email address is accurate. So when you're looking at the PDF, please make sure that the full email address is in there and typed in correctly. Once you push submit, you will receive an email confirmation to the person under the primary contact. Please check your junk or spam folders when we were testing it. That's often where we find that it goes. So please check there first. But if you're having any difficulties, please feel free to reach out to us. The confirmation receipt is important, and we want to make sure that you have that for your agencies.
Thank you. So next we're just going to talk through the LOI process and the timeline and what to expect. So we've said earlier the LOIs are due next Wednesday, June 7th, no later than 5 p.m. through the online platform SurveyGizmo. The new project work group, and in the LOI the members of that group are listed, but we won't list them out here, will be responsible for reviewing LOIs and making determination of applicants selected to continue on in the process. Applicants who are accepted or not accepted to move on will be notified Friday, June 9th. Those selected applicants will need to complete the next stage of this process, which is we're calling the new project application. There will be a webinar for new project applications the week of June 12th. Selected applicants will be asked to submit a full new project application no later than Friday, June 23rd. The new projects work group will review new project applications between June 23rd and 28th. And then selected applicants will be notified on Thursday, June 29th. If organizations or projects are selected at that point, they'll be asked to give a brief in-person presentation of their program proposal to the new projects work group on Thursday, July 6th. We ask that you set aside that date. That will be the only date that will be the opportunity for the organization to present to the new projects work group. And it's a requirement to present to the work group as well. So then final applicants selected will be notified via email the week of July 10th. The selected applicants then, the new project will be recommended by the new project work group to the COC Board of Directors for final approval at a date still to be determined, but most likely at some point in mid-July. All Chicago then, after the COC Board approves the final applicants, All Chicago will work with those approved applicants to complete a HUD project application in the eSNAP system the week of July 17th. So then all of that information, the new projects along with the NOFA, will be submitted to HUD. Usually it's the final deadline for all of that is 3 months from the time the NOFA is released. So approximately it could be late August to early September. Within the process, the NOFA process, there's something called the ranking process that's required in the NOFA. So all the new approved projects will be ranked along with all renewal projects in the FY17 ranking process, which is developed by a group called the Hearth Funding Opportunities Task Group. They make recommendations to the COC board about that ranking process. It's still at a date to be determined for that board meeting. Then the NOFA is submitted, which includes the project ranking by All Chicago. Again, once the NOFA is released, we'll know the date that it all has to be submitted. Approximately in the fall, HUD will release the funding announcements, and the new project applicants will be notified whether or not their project was funded by HUD. So we wanted to share some resources with you. Some of them are within the webinar, but just to have a page here, we have the All Chicago website there. You can contact via email anyone on the team through the COC programs at allchicago.org email, or you can contact Renee or myself directly at our email address or the phone numbers there on the screen. And I know we've said it before, but the NOFA has not yet been released, but we anticipate it being released within the next week or two. And the dates in the webinar, we're trying to stick to as much as possible, but should the NOFA have any other things that we did not anticipate, we will adjust the timeline, but let the applicants know as soon as possible. So that concludes the presentation part of the webinar. And I think people have been sending in questions throughout, but if you have questions now, please still submit, and we'll go through the questions for everyone at this point.
Great, thank you. So what we're going to do is, if you have any questions, some have been coming in, so please keep typing them in. We will do our best to answer them right now. And so we'll get started. The first question was, has the request, the LOI document changed since it was released or sent out on Wednesday? The answer to that is no, but based on what Dave mentioned in this in the webinar, is that there is one bullet point in the rapid rehousing model that we can make a correction to and make sure that that is the most recent published on our website. We are also told that there are some links in the webinar that were not working. So we can make sure that the links that are sent out are accurate, and we can make sure to follow up with that. I might be able to post them in the pane if you're unable to see them as well. There was a question about whether we can confirm if 2018 refers to the calendar year 2018 or fiscal year 2018. And that is the calendar year of 2018. The next question looks like, how many LOIs may each agency submit?
Agencies can submit LOIs for each individual program model. So in essence, 4 LOIs would be the max, 1 for PSH, 1 for rapid rehousing, 1 for coordinated entry grants, and 1 for the joint transitional rapid rehousing grant.
Okay. Also, how do scatter site projects complete the community area section where the geographical location of units is unknown in advance?
For this, I would recommend suggesting all the geographic areas that you may anticipate using. There's no limit, so please check all that you anticipate. If you end up not using some of the geographic locations, we may just ask what changed in that process.
The next question is, if the project is new units and not existing units, must the project begin housing people in 2018? Depending
on when the grant starts, there's usually a 3 to 6 month startup to house the first client. So if the grant agreement starts in October, November, as long as the grant agreement's in place, people can start to be housed in 2019.
Does the TH-PH rapid rehousing require that the agency has their own property?
So that's one of the questions we are unsure of at this point on the limited information we have about that project model. As we receive information either from HUD or the National Alliance or in the NOFA when it's released, we will pass that information on as soon as possible. We'll also post the NOFA on our website, and organizations are more than welcome to look at the NOFA themselves to get to see what HUD says about that project model.
The next question relates to the same model type. It says, is the PSH in the joint program only 2 years? And we want to make sure to distinguish that it's not PSH, it's PH. So it's a TH permanent housing, so PH rapid rehousing. And from what we have so far, it appears to be a 2-year program. I think we already answered this already, but another question came in about if your project is scatter site located in Chicago community areas by client choice, which community areas are you to check for the LOI? And we answered that a few minutes ago. The next question is, if you are considering either the new project model or an existing model, should you submit 2 LOIs to ensure consideration of either model?
Yes, you can. Any organization could submit 1 LOI per project model.
There's a question that says, can you use the money for capital purposes under the PSH model? And I think that's a question maybe about the joint model again. And so the only capital cost we went over is the joint model. That's all of the information we have at this time. And it is a little confusing, but it's not permanent supportive housing. It's a permanent housing model. Very small distinction, but an important one.
And HUD defines rapid rehousing as permanent housing, not permanent supportive housing, but permanent housing, and that's why we want to be clear that it's PH rapid rehousing, not permanent supportive housing.
The next couple of questions we might need for people to provide a little bit more context. But the first one is the funds also available for programs under the renewal category?
So I'll try to answer that as completely as I may understand it in different ways. So if you have a grant that's up for renewal, this new project money would not go towards a renewal project. It can't be added on in a sense. There are some renewal projects like safe havens, transitional housing that are renewal projects, but new project funding is not available for. So HUD in the registration notice stated what new projects could be what new projects could be created, and it's the ones we've talked about today: permanent housing, permanent supportive housing, I should say, rapid rehousing, the joint project, and coordinated SSOs.
Another question is the program for when you are starting to open a new women's shelter?
So these programs would not pay for shelters, because shelters are considered temporary housing. HUD is only looking to fund permanent housing models.
The next question is, if approved for additional PSH funds, could the money be used to raise rents with current participants rather than add units?
I don't believe these new projects can be used in conjunction with existing projects, but in the future, HUD does allow organizations to combine grants if that makes more sense for both the organization and for HUD's requirements.
The next question is, how can it be required for a project to be located within the City of Chicago city limits? My understanding is that geographic mobility prohibits this for scatter site projects. Consumer choice is the guideline. Like, can we clarify?
We'll clarify that and send out a notice to everybody on the webinar clarifying what HUD's guidance, written guidance, is around that.
The next question is, will we have a say over when in 2018 the program starts? For example, if we know the program will start in the fourth quarter of 2018, can we request to late 2018? For example, if it's a new construction, we may not be done until late 2018 or early 2019.
So the funding for the program needs to begin in 2018, calendar 2018. That's a requirement for this round in the NOFA. The agencies will have somewhat of a chance to negotiate with HUD about when the grant starts. Usually what happens in the NOFA cycle is that HUD makes the funding announcements around the fall, and then grant agreements start going out to agencies. They tend to start with renewal projects first. So January, February, March, they'll do renewal projects first, and then HUD will then do new grant agreements with organizations with new programs. So there is some leeway with that, but definitely the program and the grant would need to begin in 2018.
The next question is, if the funding is a one-year grant, how can the joint program last 2 years?
So it's a 2-year model. So the grant would be renewed year after year if it is ranked and continues to be renewed through our ranking policies and our continuum. So each grant, just like each renewal we've talked about, is technically a 1-year grant with HUD, but should be renewable.
Regarding ranking for new projects, how will new projects be compared to existing projects, or will that be determined by a committee?
The HART Funding Opportunities Task Group is the committee that decides the ranking policies or recommends the ranking policies to the COC board who approves it. So new projects will be considered in that ranking policy by the HART Funding Opportunities Task Group. For instance, last year, new projects were ranked at what we call the top of Tier 2. And all the new projects from last year were funded through the HUD competition.
For next question, for formerly shelter plus care projects or long-term rental assistance programs, are they considered PH or PSH?
I believe most of those are considered PSH.
Next question, if it's new people if it's new people, can we use FMR for rent amounts on the new unit?
Depending on if you use leasing dollars or rental assistance would determine the FMR. It would determine if you use the FMR.
The next question is, if I have a building, the program will pay for the apartment. If so, what kind of building will you need?
I'm not sure I understand that question. So somebody, the person who put that question in, if you could give a little bit more context or information, please.
We have a couple more questions left. Would you clarify, this is for new projects only? We cannot use the funding for existing projects for homeless youth and pay rent.
Correct. These are for new projects.
Next question. If we have a transitional housing program, can we apply to create a new permanent supportive housing component which would be connected to the existing program but would be considered separate?
I'm not sure if this question is getting at this, but if this question is asking if an existing transitional housing can become a joint transitional housing, permanent housing, wrap-rate housing model, we're not sure about that yet. That's, I think, when the NOFA comes out or HUD releases more information about that model type, we'll be able to answer that if it can use existing transitional housing or it has to be newly created transitional housing building or units.
Couple more questions. Which one should be used for FMR, leasing or rental?
Leasing is used, FMRs are used for leasing dollars.
It appears the last question is, we are a veterans PSH, but not funded by all Chicago COC. Our new project LOI will be to rehab and construct new units as expansion because we are at full capacity or occupancy. If approved, can we use some of those funds for capital?
That's something we might need to do some research on and get back to the person asking the question. Sorry, I don't know the answer.
Okay, another question came in. Would adding new additional scatter site units to an existing program be considered new?
No, technically no. So the new projects have to be distinct from any existing projects. But what I think some agencies do are try to standardize programs in their agency. So it could look similar to an existing project, but it would not be considered part of, or cannot be considered part of an existing project.
Okay. We might take a minute here to see if any additional questions come in, but at this time we have gone through all of the questions submitted. If you have any further, please feel free to do so, or if for some reason we accidentally missed your question, please feel free to submit it again. And as we said, the webinar will be recorded and our contact information is on here, so if you do think of more questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you all for your time and good luck in your LOI.